Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. Today we're going to talk about the time the guy foreclosed on the bank. The time that guy foreclosed on the bank. I've had quite a few people ask me about this story, and I'm always looking for good ideas to talk about. So if you have any ideas for stories, put them in the comments below or email me directly. But quite a few people have asked me to follow up on this and explain what happened. And it's kind of funny, but I've talked before about judgments. You win a lawsuit, you get a judgment. A judgment's a piece of paper that says this person owes this person money. Generally speaking, that's what a judgment is. And in most states, there'll be a time frame within which someone can appeal a judgment. And if they don't appeal it within a certain time frame, they have to pay it. And if they don't pay it within a certain time frame, someone can then take steps to collect on the judgment. And among the things that you can almost always do is get a thing called writ of execution. It might be called something else in different states, but it's a writ. It's a legal document that says specifically on it that any officer of the court or anybody authorized by the court can take that writ of execution to the person who owes the money and say, pay me or I'm going to start taking your stuff. And some people, when faced with that proposition, sheriff's on your front porch saying, I need $10,000 to satisfy this judgment, or I'm going to start hauling cars out of your driveway. Some people find the money very quickly. And some people who think they're judgment proof go, yeah, do your worst, see what you can do. And I've actually sent a deputy out to execute on a judgment before, and I've actually had him call me where he said, I'm standing on this person's porch. They're crying. Do you want to talk to them? And the sheriff hands the phone to the person, and the person says, here's how I can take steps to pay you. And we've worked those out before, and sometimes we haven't worked them out. And I've actually had a sheriff's deputy go into a business, for instance, and take all the stuff that could be moved and hauled out in, like big old U-Haul trucks and take it to auction, sell it at auction, and then after he pays himself, the proceeds go to my client to, defray the judgment. So this idea that a judgment is more than just a piece of paper is something you've got to remember, especially if you're Bank of America. And the first story, we've got a couple stories to talk about, but the first story is out of Florida. And this happened in 2011. But in Florida, an angry homeowner whose home was wrongfully foreclosed upon by Bank of America got his revenge by showing up at the local branch and, in essence, foreclosing on them. You're foreclosing on me? I'm foreclosing on you. The Florida incident arose when the bank foreclosed on Warren and Maureen Nyerges of Golden Gate Estates in Naples. I could be mispronouncing their name, and I apologize. But this action of foreclosure on their house surprised them because they'd bought the house for cash. It had no mortgage. It had no mortgage. And Bank of America just simply foreclosed on their home and said, we're foreclosing on you. So they made a bunch of phone calls and tried to straighten this thing out. And one of them said, I talked to branch managers. I called anyone who would listen to me. I wrote a certified letter to the president of the bank. No response, nothing. He finally hired an attorney, and it took the attorney 2 months to get the foreclosure action dismissed. And I'm getting these facts from an ABC story written by Alan Farnham. But I saw these facts pretty much in a lot of different places. So this stuff is not really that disputed. He then got an order, Mr. Nyerges did, to get the bank to pay his attorney fees because they were all caused by the bad acts of Bank of America. And in that process, he got a judgment against the bank for $2,500, which was to cover his attorney fees and court costs and so on. So he has this judgment, and after 5 months, Bank of America didn't pay it. And months passed, more phone calls, more letters, no payment. And so the Nyerges went back to court and got a writ of execution. And this is in Florida. And that gave him permission to seize bank assets in payment for his judgment. So on June 3rd, 2011, Nyerges, along with 2 sheriff's deputies and a moving truck. That's the nicest thing here, a moving truck. Showed up at the local Bank of America branch where the deputies informed the manager that he could either pay the Nyerges legal fees or the movers would start taking away the bank's furniture and any cash they could get their hands on. The manager quickly conferred with superiors who decided that they should in fact cut a check for the full amount owed. And then Bank of America later apologized to the Nyerges in writing, but in the apology misspelled their name. Which is one of these things, the gang that can't shoot straight. Their attorney, the Nyerges attorney, said, Bank of America never apologized for having tried to foreclose on my clients, only for not paying the money in time, which again is just, amazing. So one of the things that's interesting about this story is you go, wait, Bank of America just picked a house out of the phone book and just said we're going to foreclose on them? Like how did that happen? Well, you're going to see how it happened, but it's one of these things that still won't justify what happened. See, the home had previously been owned by somebody who had a loan through Bank of America. The previous owner had defaulted on that loan. So you go, oh, okay, well, then the Bank of America is just confused, not realizing that the old people are no longer there and they didn't know about these new people in the house. Well, not really, because the Nair just bought the house from Bank of America. So the attorney explains, my clients purchased the property directly from Bank of America. If the bank had taken 15 minutes to review their records on the property, they would have seen the details of the transaction. In his view, this whole story is symptomatic of a larger problem. Banks just aren't doing their due diligence before they start foreclosing. And again, this is in 2011. This is shortly after the real estate market, went into its meltdown, and the banks and mortgage companies were foreclosing to where they had mills just cranking out the papers. And there have been stories about that on 60 Minutes and everybody else about how they were, robo-signing documents and affidavits that were fraudulent, and half the time they couldn't even find the mortgage papers. And so this happened kind of in the tail end of that, but it's still no excuse. And the people whose home was in this process, who then foreclosed in the bank, the attorney says, well, they're ecstatic, but they're drained emotionally. It's scary to have your home foreclosed on when you paid cash for it. Think about it. You buy a house for cash, you assume it's the one thing that can't happen is have it foreclosed upon. So this same story has an extra story along with it, talking about the problems of Bank of America right around the summer of 2011. And in Riverdale, Georgia, right around the same time, a Bank of America branch manager is facing jail time for contempt of court. And in the dispute there is who owns an abandoned home. Because the mayor of the town says the home is an eyesore and a safety hazard. And according to all the records, it's owned by the bank. So they've gone to court and said, would you guys either clean this mess up or sell it or do something? And if you have to, just tear it down. But for more than 6 months, according to the city attorney, Deanna Johnson, the city had been ordering Bank of America to either tear the building down or do something. The bank, she says, has not been responsive, just ignoring them. They've been cited for failure to comply, and they're accruing fines of $500 per day. And so the mayor said, hey, look, they're in contempt now, so we're going to ask that the court hold these people accountable. A city court judge had ordered a June 28th hearing at which a local bank manager would have to show cause why he or she should not be arrested and jailed for contempt. I'll take another look at that and see if I can find it. I couldn't find it right away as to what happened in that story. I suspect nobody went to jail. I suspect they probably came into court and said, oh, you guys are serious about this, huh? And that's one of the greatest things ever, is when you see somebody who gets brought into court for the first time in front of the judge who's been issuing orders the whole time saying, do this, do this, do this, and you bring them in and you go, why are you ignoring my orders? And, a piece of paper that is a court order is more powerful than a typical piece of paper. And it'll say right on it, this is a court order from this court, and this judge signed it, and, you are hereby ordered to do the following things. You need to obey those court orders, or you can get yourself in trouble. Now, here's the thing. In Michigan, a lot of people know about Dr. Kevorkian, the man who was dubbed the suicide doctor. And I know he's famous worldwide. And Dr. Kevorkian's lawyer was Jeffrey Feiger, a very, very well-known and successful attorney here in Michigan. I've actually met him. Very, very nice guy. And I also had met Dr. Kevorkian, although he passed away a few years ago. In fact, ironically, I wrote a book called Death's Door about the Italian Hall disaster. And I bumped into him someplace, and I had those books in my car. And I asked him, I go, do you read? Do you like to read books? And he goes, yeah, I love reading. I go, what kind of books? He goes, history. I said, oh, hang on. And I went and got a copy of my book. And I gave it to him, and I signed it. And a little while later, I saw a documentary on TV about Kevorkian. And my book, Death's Door, is clearly laying on the table in front of him while he's talking. So a slight brush with fame I'm pointing out there for no other reason other than it entertains me for a minute. But the point is this, that when you hear about the bank being foreclosed upon by somebody, it reminded me of the story of Jeffrey Feiger, because Jeffrey Feiger is a well-known attorney in Michigan who specializes in medical malpractice cases, these multi-million-dollar cases where there's horrific injuries caused by medical malpractice. And but many people in the legal industry were kind of curious. How is it that Jeffrey Feiger, a personal injury medical malpractice attorney, was defending Dr. Kevorkian in criminal cases? Because they tried Kevorkian many, many times in Michigan, and Jeffrey Feiger defended most of those. And it was an amazing story, and they've made movies out of it. I'm not going to get into it here. But many people wondered, wait, how did those two get together in the first place? And I've read the story several places, but I double checked to make sure I got it right. And I'm getting this story from the Los Angeles Times, 1993. This goes back a ways. But this explains how Kevorkian and Feiger got together. And in 1989, the same year young Steve Lehto went off to law school, Kevorkian was looking for an attorney. And he was flipping through the news, and he came across a little story in the newspaper about how a local hospital, and in fact, it's the hospital Kevorkian would actually pass away in way down the road. And it's a hospital I've been in many times. I got stitches in my hand there. I got stitches in my mouth there. I'm trying to think what other injuries I had treated there. But it's a hospital right there on Woodward Avenue. It's a very, very well-known hospital. And Feiger had gotten a very large judgment against the hospital. And the judgment was there, and apparently it didn't get appealed. And apparently it was just sitting there, and it was ripe for collection. And apparently whenever Mr. Feiger contacted the attorneys for the hospital and said, when are you going to pay the judgment? He was not given, I don't know, answers that convinced him that he was going to get the money anytime soon. So Feiger showed up at the hospital's administrative offices and started removing furniture until the hospital paid. I've heard the story several different ways, and I've read it several different places. And I heard that he showed up with moving trucks. And I heard he showed up with sheriff's deputies. And he showed up with a writ of execution. And basically said, look, guys, I'm owed, and according to the story, he's owed $426,000, which is not a lot compared to some of the other judgments he got. But that's enough money to where, you kind of want your money. If someone owed me $426,000, I wanted to pay me too. And so when they didn't pay him, and he apparently ran out of things that he could do otherwise, he said, okay, fine, let's get a writ of execution, get some U-Hauls, go on down there and see if we can't start either grabbing stuff or convince them we're serious. And apparently, shortly after that, somebody ran up there with a check for $426,000 and said, here's your check, Mr. Feiger. So I had heard of a similar story about this, and now it's reminded me of the two. But for those of you who are not from Michigan, I have to tell you something, and this is one of those little tidbits that will fascinate you, and you may be able to pull this at a party sometime if the right song comes on the radio. But Jeffrey Feiger has a brother named Doug Feiger, and so when Jeffrey Feiger went off to study, at the University of Michigan, and then he went on to law school, his little brother Doug formed a band called The Knack, who you will remember for this song My Sharona. And it's kind of funny because I remember in the 80s, of course, hearing The Knack on the radio and hearing My Sharona. And, of course, the other song, Good Girls Don't, which I think is a better song. Not trying to start a musical argument here. I like them both. I just have the right to like one more than the other. And then, of course, I knew at the time that Doug Feiger was the lead singer because it's a band from Michigan. When a Michigan band gets on the radio, you pay attention to these things. And then, of course, later on, down the road, when Jeffrey Feiger became a famous attorney and also representing Dr. Kevorkian, I remember going, Feiger, I wonder if there's a connection. It turns out they're brothers. So one brother defending Kevorkian and getting million-dollar verdicts. The other brother, lead singer of The Knack, and My Sharona. So that's where we got after discussing about the guy foreclosing on the bank in Florida over that money that was owed to him, but they wouldn't pay him. So questions or comments, as always, fire them my way. Questions or story ideas, also put them in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.